Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ahmed Farooq, and I am the ambassador of Pakistan to Denmark. I would like to welcome all participants today to this Tech Talk organized by the Embassy of Pakistan. This is the first in the series of 6 Tech Talks that we have planned over the next 4 months. The objective of this Tech Talk is to share knowledge and make the participants aware of the cutting edge work that is being done in Pakistan in the field of information technology. These Tech Talks are being sponsored by the top IT companies in Pakistan that are offering a variety of services internationally. Very briefly, I would like to just place before you a few facts of the IT sector in Pakistan. Pakistan has more than 2,000 IT companies and call centers that are providing services in all key areas, including CRM software, data warehousing, product design, developing, and testing. More than 3,000 English-speaking IT professionals with expertise in current and emerging IT products and technologies are working in these companies. More than 20,000 fresh IT graduates and engineers are joining the workforce each year. There is a rising startup culture in the country, and Pakistan has been ranked number 3 in the world for freelance development by Oxford Analytica. The topic of today's Tech Talk, as you are all aware, is AI revolutionizing science, knowledge discovery, and regulatory compliance. Our presenter is Mr. Mohammad Tariq, who is the Chief Data Scientist at VisionNet and has been working in this area for over a decade. VisionNet is one of the largest software companies in Pakistan, having presence in the US, Germany, UK, and Dubai. Mr. Tariq has designed AI systems to solve numerous challenges in big pharma. He was involved in AI projects related to sensor data in clinical trials and AI-based addressable patient share and forecasting of demand for new indications of drugs. His team has also designed medical information retrieval systems using deep neural nets to automate textual information extraction. Such a system was worked for pharma co-vigilance text analysis, real-time literature search, and also used as a research question answering engine. Some housekeeping announcements. Mr. Tariq's presentation would be for about 50 minutes, and thereafter we will have a Q&A sessions. You could raise your hands to ask questions, and we would also welcome your comments. Questions could also be posted in the chat section, and we will take them up. Your mics will be muted, and when you can unmute them when you desire to ask a question. The webinar is being live streamed on Facebook, and its recording will be available on Facebook as well as the Embassy's YouTube channel. So let's begin. Over to you, Mr. Tariq.
Thank you for the nice introduction, Mr. Ambassador Ahmed Farooq, and thank you all for attending today. As introduced, I'm Mohammad Tariq, Chief Data Scientist at VisionNet. And today our topic is around how we use AI for knowledge discovery, regulatory compliance, and and scientific innovation, specifically in biotech and health sector. So I'll share my slides and then quickly introduce the company that I work for, and we'll go from there. I hope my slides screen is visible.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, so the topic is AI revolutionizing science, knowledge discovery, and regulatory compliance. And the focus is mainly on health sector and biotech. So before we move to the topic, I quickly want to introduce the company. We are more than 5,000 employees globally. 100% ownership is with the employees, and we have more than 300 clients globally. We have been there in the US for the last more than 25 years, almost 26 years. Currently, we have offices in Pittsburgh, New York, New Jersey, Munich, Lahore, Bangalore, and also Dubai, which is not mentioned here. In terms of services that we provide knowledge work consultancy, and of course, converted that consulting into software. We make cloud AI solutions specifically, and we also do a lot of cloud data lake implementation for biotech and healthcare. Our other bigger focus is retail, where we make AI-driven supply chain automation, end-to-end pipelines and solutions. We automate CPG retailers with all of their processes from supply chain to retail. And we also work with financial customers like consumer lending companies. And we provide solutions not only using software skill set, but we bring thought leaders into the play, and we take the problem understanding and business understanding first approach. So we have expertise in the business and the functional knowledge, and then we implement the solution using the cutting edge technologies like AI and other big data technologies. I have given my email on this slide if somebody wants to note it, and if they have a detailed question that needs, thoughtful answers, and because of the shortage of the time, maybe we will not be able to give detailed answers. So you can note this email down. I'll also show this email in end of the presentation, and you can send me your questions directly right now or any other time, and I'll be able to answer it as soon as I get your emails. So the agenda for today's talk is to, I've already done the introduction, and then I'll talk about the importance of artificial intelligence in the health sector, and then I'll discuss a use case, which is orthostatic hypotension assessment through AI, which is actually a regulatory compliance accelerator for healthcare and biotech research. Then I'll discuss a medical question answering engine that uses AI for summarizing research and answering questions of research for scientists. And then I'll discuss a couple of drug trial outcome measures that are using AI and sensors, which is scratch scoring and then detecting the intensity of balance issues in the foot. And that is, of course, detecting severity of some diseases in the biotech. And then I'll talk about new drug launch volume prediction, the model that predicts volume for a drug that is going to come to the market. And also we'll discuss the influences of maintaining the demand or predicting the demand after the launch. In the end, I'll discuss artificial intelligence adoption and implementation life cycle, and what we have learned at VisionNet about how we should engage in the projects and how we drive the AI projects towards success with the help of our clients. So I'll quickly try to point us towards how artificial intelligence is becoming more and more of an enabler in the biotech and health sector, especially in the innovation. And if we look at the acquisitions and spending on AI, in 2014, 600 million was spent on acquisition of AI startups, and in 2021, the projected figure is 6.6 billion. So in the last 7 years, 11-time increase is seen in the focus towards AI for health sector. If we come to our first use case, which is orthostatic hypotension assessment using sensors. This AI use case helps specifically in regulatory compliance required by bodies like FDA. And then biotech and pharma companies are interested in maintaining that compliance. And also their clinical trials department is the direct stakeholder. So these two departments in a pharma company or a biotech company are direct customers for such use cases of regulatory AI. The example that we took is one of many examples that we have implemented and we are in the implementation, where we help sense patients' measures taken through AI so that regulatory bodies can look into the data and see what happened actually, rather than we telling them or a doctor writing to them that this happened to the patient's symptoms. And I just want to also mention here that some of these use cases are a project in process. Some of these use cases are already in production, and they went to the actual battleground of the medical research and the usage. So if you look at this use case, there is a set procedure for taking measurements of orthostatic hypotension. Orthostatic hypotension means if an elderly patient, usually an elderly patient, when they stand up from a sitting position, their blood pressure goes down, and that for measuring that and for measuring the intensity of that, the procedure suggested is that the patient should be requested to stand up, and then the doctor should wait or the nurse should wait for 1 full minute, and then they should first take the heart rate, and then they should take the systolic blood pressure and the diastolic blood pressure. So I'll only show the automation of these 3 steps through AI and how regulatory can look into the transparency of this measurement. Now, what I will show is how AI can note when the patient was asked to stand up, and then how the patient was actually waiting for 1 whole minute, and then the heart rate was taken. So moving on to how we do it, the technology part, the fun part, at least for some of us, is that we use accelerometer and gyroscopes that are worn on a little above the hip. And these accelerometer and gyroscopes, if you go into their physics and science, they record 6 degrees of freedom, position and orientation of a human body or a human torso, if you tie it there. 3 rotational positions and 3 translational positions are recorded at all times. And accelerometers also note the gravitational vector all the time. So if somebody is wearing an accelerometer and they are changing their postures, the sensor will know what is their body angle against the gravity vector. So gravity vector always points down. So these 6 or 7, you can call it, quantities are used to detect whether the patient was rightly stood up and the patient waited 1 minute before the heart rate or not. So if you look at the sensor stream coming from an accelerometer and a gyroscope, it's pretty cryptic when you look at it. Although it does show changes when the body, let's say this is a torso on the right, and the body changes the position, and also the accelerometer and gyroscope changes the data a lot, but it's such a cryptic pattern that we need AI to detect it. The second thing is some patients have different body dynamics, so some patient will generate a different wave instead of this one. So for those novelties, we use AI and machine learning to find the common pattern for each patient, for every patient, the common pattern of every patient when they stand up from sitting, and then we detect it with higher accuracy. So how this orthostatic hypotension heart rate measurement works is these 6 signals are coming, which is gyroscope readings and accelerometer reading, and you can see that these signals at each time point represent a different posture of the patient. And the AI is trained to detect the standing posture, which is the signal should look like this. Look at this. If you look at the signal in standing position, the data is all following a same pattern. And when the standing is disturbed again, the data start changing and vibrations start occurring. So detection of what type of vibration is standing, what type of vibration is sitting, what type of vibration is the middle stance, that is the job of AI. So for this use case, we only need a classifier and a segmenter to detect the standing. And what we do is we detect when the patient transition, which is this spot. So like this is time. Time is passing and the model is ignoring the data. And as soon as the patient transition to standing, the model turns a counter on and it waits. And then it waits for 10 seconds and then it waits for 30 seconds and 40 seconds and 50 seconds. And you can see the heart rate is growing, maybe because the patient stood up or maybe just because of their physical condition. And when the 60 seconds are reached, the AI knows this patient is still standing and we have done waiting 60 seconds, then the heart rate is recorded. So you can see the heart rate of 118 will be recorded while the previous heart rates are ignored because AI, although detected the patient stood up, but it is waiting for 1 minute, which is what the procedure said in the previous slides. So that is the automation of detection of patient being stood up and then waiting and then taking the heart rate. So extreme feasibility is available to the pharma company folks and to the FDA or any regulatory body. Pharma company needs this transparency because sometimes usually pharma applies their drug research or their drug outcome analysis at some third-party clinic. And in that third-party clinic, pharma has limited means of evaluating whether the third-party clinic is following the due practice of waiting and then measuring the outcomes. So this sensor-based AI can give some visibility for the pharma to that, and they can question the remote clinics that are doing the drug trial on the behalf of the pharma company. Signal shape detection is a problem because signal is coming from multiple types of body weight and bone length. Multiple heights and multiple bone lengths also disturb the pattern. So the signal shape has some general features, but there is a lot of variability also. Devices can be calibrated differently. Device can be worn at different places. Like people overweight wear the device a little lower than the people who are not overweight. So all those variabilities are catered for by the AI by finding the common pattern in the sensor data and still detecting the standing position of a patient regardless of their changes, interpatient changes and interpatient variability. The next use case that I'm going to talk about is automating pharmacovigilance process through deep learning-based natural language processing, which is shortly called NLP. This use case, pharmacovigilance, is a concern of clinicians in the clinics and hospitals and nurses, and also clinical trial department of the biotech and pharma company, and the regulatory compliance department of hospitals, and also the pharma company is concerned with this use case and are stakeholders for this use case. What is pharmacovigilance? So pharmacovigilance is after the drug is approved, pharma companies are bound to collect the adverse events and the side effects that patients are seeing in practice when they're actually using those drugs. And the doctors are seeing in practice, and the nurses are seeing in practice. And nurses and doctors need to note those adverse reactions and then send it back to the pharma company. And regulatory bodies like FDA are entrusted to look into these adverse effects. And these adverse effects are called ADRs, adverse drug reactions. And the current state of adverse reaction detection is that there are notes written by doctors in multiple files, and then manual tagging of adverse reaction in the text is done. The phrase that looks like an adverse reaction is tagged or marked. It is time consuming, it is boring, sometimes it's prone to error, there is a lot of underreporting. It has a lot of cost because it's a manual effort. Doctors and other medical staff is not very focused on this activity, but they have to do it. And the amount of report is growing because patient can access medical assistance through email, chat, other digital mediums. They can complain about their, they can send their queries through these channels, and there is a lot of text, and then manually reporting adverse event out of those is a real challenge, and it's becoming bigger and bigger. If we do it through AI and automation, the pharmacovigilance text extraction, it will save costs, it will give us awareness of risk, it will give the awareness of risk to the biotech company and also to the hospital. Regulatory compliance and regulatory transparency will be increased because AI will be sending all the reports that it detects. And the underreporting will be minimized. Trend analysis can be done on a more clean data because AI is detecting it. And trend analysis means that if there are bad symptoms occurring frequently for a drug, then it should be called off or something. Real-time safety summaries can be generated. FDA and other regulatory bodies sometimes require second-day pharmacovigilance reporting, so real-time summaries are very difficult in the manual process, so that can be achieved. And that also means faster turnaround time. How do we automate the pharmacovigilance incidence reporting or adverse event reporting? So what we do is we take multiple data sets. Fortunately, there are a lot of data sets available in medical text and also other medical information. And we use ontologies that define the medical terminologies and the medical reactions and adverse events. And we train our knowledge graph based on those. And the knowledge graph is like an expert doctor's knowledge, and it knows what is the class of a reaction and what is the dependent or causal, words that can cause this adverse reaction. So it's in a language space, in a word world, the world of vocabulary. It knows a lot of correlations between different concepts in the medical vocabulary. And the knowledge graph then enriches the normal medical text that we see in the databases. And then using those medical texts, we call it medical lexicons, we train our NER detector. NER detector means named entity recognizer, which can detect any named entity that we want it to detect. For example, Abraham Lincoln is a named entity, and AI can detect it through name entity recognizer. But if you train this name entity recognizer for specific purposes like adverse reaction, then it will only detect the adverse reactions in a text, and it will not detect, popular people or popular cities. It will only call adverse reactions as detection named entities. So given such a text like this one, it will detect the high fever as a named entity, pain in my chest will be a named entity, respiratory issues will be a named entity, feeling nauseous will be a named entity. And then these entities are further refined by our trained knowledge graph. We present it to the knowledge graph, and then we try to learn what else is connected with each of these named entity or adverse reaction. High fever is an adverse reaction, but can it be caused by infection? Can it be caused by inflammation? Can it be caused by a drug? And those kind of, graph and tree analysis is done, and that gives us some sort of scoring that we would not be able to disclose here. That scoring then decides the intensity of each adverse reaction. Whether high fever is a very risky one and it's more related to this drug that the patient is taking, or the pain in the chest is very riskier than high fever. So whichever adverse reaction has more precedence, that is highlighted with scores, and then those scores help us in reporting those adverse reactions. The models that we have for name entity recognition and for knowledge graph, both are deep learning neural nets, and they use extensive training. They also use transfer learning. So for those of you who are interested in the technology behind, that is the technology. And we were able to automate pretty interesting results, and especially the knowledge graph has shown some very impressive human-like intelligence, and it really amazes us as developers to see how much it knows about the processes of medicine. Then this use case called medical Q&A, it helps scientists to answer questions for them that they have from the literature. The thing is that every week, thousands of research papers are published in the medical research, and if you want to read them, you have to go and search in the journals or search in the Google, and then you will be presented with tens of abstracts. You have to read the abstracts to know whether this paper can answer your question, and then you have to go to some of the papers to read places in the paper so that you can find the answer. So that's a very tedious process, and it takes a lot of precious time from the scientist. They don't need to read the whole paper. They just want to focus in on an answer to a question, and then they might want to read that paper, but first they want to see whether that answer exists in a paper or not that is newly published. So it is a really, it's a real need of the day, so much literature, and then finding your required information in the new literature is something that is critically required in the development and science area of healthcare. The users that can use this model of question answering is clinicians, nurses, clinical trials team, and regulatory compliance. All of them can make use of this this use case. So what we do is we present question answer pairs for thousands of research questions, and then there are answers. The answers are coming from popular research papers in the journals, and those thousands of questions and thousands of answers go into our model. The model converts questions and answers. Model has learned to convert. This is the model that we use for converting questions to vectors. So BioBERT is a model, it's a deep learning model, and it converts your question paragraphs to vectors. You can see the vector representation over here. This is a question vector that we see here, and this is an answer vector that we see here. How do we convert questions to just one numeric vector? That can be discussed in some other talk if we like, but this is what it does. It converts your questions to vectors, and it answers to questions to vectors and answers to vectors. And then there is another module that learns what type of question vectors go with what type of answer vectors. So like what type of quantity A correlates with what type of quantity B. So that correlation or that goes with question is answered by this module, which is called dot product similarity matching, or other similarity matching are also available. And if we want to look inside the memory of this deep learning model, what it does is it maps all your questions and the rephrasing of the questions, shown here as blue dots. You can see there are blue spots, and these spots is not one dot, it's like 10, 15 dots superimposed near each other. All these blue dots, small clouds of blue dots, like this is one cloud of blue dots, this is another cloud of blue dots. they are representing one question rephrased in 10 different types of questions. So 10 forms of one question is all these 10 blue dots. And then 10 different rephrasings of questions are all these 10 blue dots. So you can see here we have almost like 300-400 questions. But because they mean the same thing, that's why we see a question cluster here in the blue, question cluster here in the blue, question cluster here in the blue. And then what are those gray dots around the blue dots? The gray dots are the possible answers for all those blue dots. So what our model does is it maps the questions and answer to the same space. And if your question belongs to one of these blue clusters, then your answer will also be surrounding this blue cluster. So first we try to identify where our question lies in the blue clusters. And once we are able to assign our blue question to the blue cluster, then any of the gray dot can be a best answer for it. The closer the gray dot to the blue cluster, the better the answer comparability. And then there can be many answers because there are many gray dots around the blue dots. So that is a vector space explanation. I'm not sure how much all of you were able to follow, but multiple gray dots mean multiple possible answers can be shown to the user. They can click on any of these three answers. You can see here, there are three answers shown in a 3D stacking. And the first answer is from this paper, which is the most probable answer. And it says, the question is, which drugs are effective for COVID? And the answer is, recent clinical trials carried out in China has found promising therapeutic applications of chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine for COVID-19. So it's an exact answer found in a paper for this question. And this can take you directly to the paper that is talking about the question you're looking for. So a lot of time saved of reading abstracts and looking at your search and trying to decide which abstract to read. You know, it takes more than an hour to find a question usually. The next two use cases are about using sensors for extracting patient outcomes. Now, what is patient outcomes? When a drug is administered on a patient in a trial, then after a day or after a week, we want to evaluate what is the condition of the patient's disease severity. And for that, we use self-reported scoring. For example, a patient says my pain is 9 out of 10, or the doctor says the patient's condition is today 6 out of 10. So that is self-reported scoring, and self-reported scoring are sometimes subjective in nature, but FDA have approved those because they're the best that we have. One of the example of those scorings is called ScoreAD. ScoreAD is a reported scoring mechanism that takes inputs from doctor or the patient themselves to evaluate how much the AD intensity is. What is AD? AD is atopic dermatitis. Some people call it eczema. And in eczema, ScoreAD helps us in measuring how bad the eczema is. So if a drug is administered, ScoreAD can help you see whether your atopic dermatitis is improving or not. Now, what we propose is sensor-based scratch scoring. You know, in eczema, people scratch their skin sometimes. And we want to propose scratching intensity through sensors and then use AI to give it a proper numeric score like ScoreAD. And that will be more objective score, more of an objective score than the ScoreAD. ScoreAD is relatively more subjective. It can be distorted by patient's opinion or doctor's opinion. But the objective score that we want to design, and we are in the process of designing, we are halfway, that will be extremely objective because it's only translating sensor data into the intensity values of the disease. This use case helps clinical trial and scientists in the biotech research development organizations. Let me give you more detail on the scratch rating. So self-reported scratch scores called self-reported numerical scale or self-reported numeric scales are sometimes used, and they're not very objective. You can see this is a scale from 0 to 10, and the patient can rate their scratching today, skin scratching and itching. And sometimes they'll feel it is 7, but another day, the same scratching intensity, they'll feel 8 because it's hot weather and they're feeling more annoyed. So this was not pretty objective, right? To make it more objective, somebody proposed that make it more objective and add cartoons to the scale. So the patient will look at the cartoon and their emotions, and then maybe the patient will be able to rate better. But this, I think, is not, again, objective enough, because I might think differently of each of these characters, and somebody else will think differently about them, and then, score their scratching intensity and itching intensity on the skin. What we propose is that skin intensity is an actual physical happening that can be recorded through sensors or cameras or anything. And then there are multiple types of scratching. You can have very aggressive, long distance scratching on your limbs, for example, and you can measure the length of the body which is affected, the width of the body and the length of the body which is affected through scratching. Or you can see scratching activity where the patient is scratching a very small focused area, very centric area, and the area gets blistered, and all bad things happen because of scratching. So the centricity of scratching and the length of scratch area can be detected. Also, the velocity and the peak acceleration of scratching can be detected. So there are multiple measures that we are calculating, and then we'll go into the process of validation and statistical validity and statistical significance. What we are planning to use and what we are using data from is a actigraph sensor. Actigraph sensor traditionally used for rest bouts, sleep bouts, and wake bouts, and energy consumption throughout the day of a patient. They wear it on a wrist, and then these black spots show, these black plots show that the patient is active. Green band is sleep time, and in the sleep time the patient is not active. You can see we want to add scratching activity to the plots of the actigraph, and what we propose is that we use a neural net to detect different types of scratching motion, like low frequency, high amplitude scratching, high frequency, low amplitude scratching, mid frequency, mid amplitude scratching. And you can see the high amplitude and low frequency in the plot in the sensor data. This is the actual ground truth collected from a sleeping patient's activity recording, and this is the actual neural net labels. Neural net is able to detect whether the patient was scratching like this or like this or like this. And these are the signals that show high amplitude scratching. These are the signals that show low amplitude scratching. You can see the pattern for yourself that there is a lot of evidence of scratching. This is the pipeline of the LSTM and CNN-based model, which helps us predict these three classes. You can see the colors. That visualization that I was showing to you is modified, and at night at this time, the patient was scratching with this intensity, and then this intensity, and then this intensity. You can see the intensity is changing, and then later night, the patient was not scratching at all. So you can detect when the patient is actually scratching, rather than just asking them in the morning, how was the scratching? So it's so objective in its nature. And the detection that we were able to do are through a neural net. Neural net tells us from which second to which second the patient was scratching. We are also able to highlight the centricity of scratch. You can see the ellipse, the bigger the ellipse, the more wider the patient's scratching area, and smaller the ellipse, the patient was more centric in their scratching motion. We can also show different other scores like average scratch velocity, centricity is discussed, peak acceleration of scratching. We can also talk about mean scratching duration, max scratching duration, because the patient can scratch for 1 minute or patient can scratch only for 10 seconds in an episode of scratching. So these all visualizations are possible because our AI segments the scratching time. Then somebody will think that, hey, these are sensor-based outcomes, and how would FDA approve them? So we are also helping our client in approving approval statistics and approval activity. So ScoreAD is an approved score for scratching. in atopic dermatitis, and we have represented the SCORAD in the light and the dark colors. So you can see light colors show light SCORAD score or low scratching. Dark colors show very high scratching intensity. That is SCORAD, that is an FDA approved scoring technique, and we are representing this on a principal component map where the color shows the growth of SCORAD while the upwards trend, which is going in the diagonal, shows growth in our sensor base scratch score. So you can see the scratch score represented in this sensor data is plotting each SCORAD color differently. Like low SCORAD score, low scratching intensity is plotted in a different fashion. You can see the gray. And then the highest is plotted in a different shape, and then the medium is plotted in a different shape. That difference can be summarized in this PCA by going towards the diagonal here. So if you go more upwards in the diagonal, you see high intensity scratching in the sensor space, and if you go downwards, you see low intensity scratching in the sensor space. And you can see the color is correlated with the diagonal motion. Diagonal motion is our sensor severity, and colors change is the SCORAD severity. So that is how we are helping our client to see how our sensor severity is correlated with the SCORAD sensor severity, and it's not something that we are bringing is like very way off from SCORAD. We're not off from SCORAD. We are pretty much behaving like SCORAD, but better and easy to capture and with more evidence. Another sensor is Morticon, and the use case that I'm going to present is going to affect again the clinical trial department and scientists in a research development company or pharma. Morticon captures pressure data on the foot in different places. You can see the patient is pushing more force on the metatarsal bones, and you can see the bones are showing a lot of pressure. And here they're putting a lot of pressure on the heels. So these differences can be measured from a foot sensor. From foot sensor, you can detect whether the patient's foot was in a stance phase. Stance phase means foot is on the ground, or in a heel off phase, which means half foot is up from the ground. And swing means the whole foot is swinging in the air during a gait cycle, and then heel strike means the foot is touching the ground again. And our AI can detect each of these phases of the foot from the shoe pressure. And then analysis can be done on the patient's limb. What do I mean by limb? If a patient is hitting the ground, you can see this is the heel strike phase, and this is again for the next step, a heel strike phase, and one of them is wider, which means longer time taken for hitting the ground, and smaller time taken for hitting the ground, which means there is a limp. Sometimes patient put the heel calmly on the ground, and sometimes they put the foot abruptly on the ground. Sometimes calm, sometimes abrupt means limping. And it gives you a numeric score for the limp or the irregularity of the gait. Further, we can extract center of pressure from the foot pressure. So all these 16 sensors that we saw in a foot have a central pressure point, which is called center of pressure. And that center of pressure can have a pressure excursion curve. This is a pressure excursion, center of pressure excursion curve, which means that if patient changes weight, and if the patient changes their weight from left to right or front to back, their center of pressure in the foot plays along with that and tries to balance the patient so that they don't fall. If you change your weight backwards, your center of pressure will go backwards to save you from falling. Right. I'll quickly jump to what we did for the center of pressure and excursion curve. There is a disease called PSP, which is progressive supranuclear palsy. Progressive supranuclear palsy is a neurodegenerative disease in which you're not able to efficiently control your foot bones or your foot muscles to balance out your center of pressure, right? And center of mass for that matter. And PSPRS is another score that is approved for measuring the PSP severity. And if we take a patient with 57 PSP, somebody might want to mute their microphone. I can see a lot of talking in the background. Right. So PSP 57 is bad than the PSP of 22. So PSP 22 needs to be considered good. Then we ask the patient to move their torso forward. That will change their center of pressure to forward, and then their foot will change their when they move forward, their body center of mass goes forward, and to save a fall forward, the foot takes the center of pressure forward. And you can see in a healthy patient, the center of pressure is moving very smoothly. It's traveling almost in a straight line, and when the patient takes the torso back, the center of pressure goes back towards the back of the foot. Then we ask the patient to move the body in the diagonal so that the center of mass goes in the diagonal, and the foot fights that center of mass going in the diagonal, and it takes the center of pressure in the diagonal. It is again almost like a straight line compared to the red one. And then we ask the patient to move their body diagonally to the left, and their center of pressure moves diagonally in a straight line and then comes back. So the pattern of these curves where straight line content is high can be detected through AI. And then the score of 22 can be predicted, or a smaller score can be predicted through AI prediction of regression. But if the patient has bad neurodegeneration, if you ask them to bend the body in the diagonal, their foot also wants to move the center of pressure straight in the diagonal, but it can't do it. They can't control their foot bones and foot joints, and it sways all over the place, and they come back after moving all over the place. So that can be detected again by AI, and bigger score can be given to them. So this makes the coordination and balancing deficiency more calculatable and driven through sensors and AI. Advanced neural nets are again used for detecting the two patterns. Then the use cases, drug launch volume prediction and influences of post-launch. So I'll quickly go through these use cases because I don't want to take more time than what I was given to. I only have 10 minutes left. So in this use case, we want to predict the new product or new indication demand. New product is a drug. A new indication is also one form of selling the drug, for simplicity. And we train a Bayesian neural network for predicting the market share and the demand. So what we do is we take the state population and its statistics from census data, and also we collect other data set for burden of disease, and we find the annual state diagnosis distribution for every disease. So this is the distribution that we have trained. It's a Gaussian mixture of Gaussian distribution. We trained it, and then we found out that the cancer share is this much. The probability of any person getting a cancer is this much. So this shows us the probability of cancer. If you want to find the market share for a cancer drug, then you take this distribution and this probability and then move on your Bayesian network on this edge, and you go to the HPC drug choice distribution. HCP is healthcare provider. This can be a doctor, a clinic, or a hospital. What this model does is it models the preference of a hospital for a certain drug. So you can see this is hospital A's probability of choosing a drug for cancer. So I took the probability of cancer, multiplied it with my new, NPL means my new product, my new drug. So I multiply the probability of cancer with the probability of the doctor choosing my new drug against other drugs. You can see these are other drugs. Probability of other drug, another drug, another drug, and another drug. And this is probability of choosing my new drug. So this is like a competition, and this is my share in the eyes of that doctor or in the eyes of that hospital. So this model models each hospital against all the cancer drugs. And I don't want to go into the detail of which cancers. Like cancer can further be divided to another node here, which is like skin cancer and lung cancer, and then the probability will further be, filtered. Then the share of the doctor's choice for my medicine is again exposed to another distribution of demographic age distribution. So which demographic my drug is targeting, that will further reduce the probability of my drug being selected. But it will give me some probability of my drug being selected because of the age bracket that my drug is targeting or my drug was designed for. Then we look at the year of life lost adjustments. In the case of cancer, you have to know what is the average number of years that the patient lives to have that drug. And we adjust based on that, because if a patient is not going to stay long with us, then even if the drug is very useful for them, still the use from that patient will be reduced. And we do that reduction by training the YLL data, the year of life left data, or the year of life lost data, to decide how many years on average each patient is going to give us for consuming that drug. And then prescription duration distribution is affected by this YLL adjustment. Then state-wise population claims data is used for pills per month distribution or vials per month distribution of patients. State-wise insurance data tells you on average what age of patients consume how many pills or how many vials, what is the intensity of disease and how many pills they consume. All those distributions are available in the claims data. So we convert the patient consumption into the number of pills by this distribution, and then we convert it into actual product demand. When we train that model, this is actually a simulation model that is ready to simulate all the citizens of a country for either contracting that drug, diagnosis of that disease, or after diagnosis, the patient choosing a certain drug for them, and then our drug falling in their age bracket and choice, and then how much life do they have left and how many pills they will be described based on their intensity. And then it gives us quantity per patient. This model can give you quantity for each patient. And then what we do is we take all the country population, we run it through simulation. You have population data, so you can assume each and every person in the population to run through this simulation. And your model in the previous slide will assign somebody 2 pills a day, somebody 4 pills a day, and it will be assigning drugs to some patients while the other will either not have cancer or will be healthy or will have another cancer which is not suitable for this drug. So they will not be assigned your drug, but some patient will be assigned your drug, and the simulation will run. When you're done with all the population of your country's simulation, you will have the actual drug volume demand in a year or in a period. Then further, we're helping our client to find the influences of post-launch demand. Once they launch the drug, then what can reduce their drug demand or increase their drug demand? So for that, we use a lot of claims data that is available through third-party data providers like treatment patterns data, target product profiles, patient segments, cost of treatment, state-wise burden of disease, comparative effectiveness of the drug, switches and restarts probability of different hospitals for that drug, duration of use on different age segments, and post-launch in-market data like patient journey, comparative effectiveness, medical adherence of patients, patient cost analysis, pharmacovigilance and safety data that I have just discussed. These all data points help us in finding out how much the demand is going to be after the drug has launched and it has seen the market. And then there are market share indicators also given in this slide that we are using and extracting data for. Some data is proprietary, some data is open source and available online. And then there are patient statistics also, which are visible on the slide, but in the interest of time, I'll not go through all of these. So these data points help our model to further filter the demand or further improve the numbers of the demand when the drug is launched. Now I will discuss the artificial intelligence project life cycle and implementation. We'll try to answer how to go about coming up with an AI use case that is feasible for your company and is doable and will add value to your company. So we follow these three processes in the rows: business feasibility, data feasibility, and execution feasibility. These activities are further divided into 3 steps. For business feasibility, we try to make sure that the problem definition is clear by having meetings and having communication and sharing documentation with the stakeholders and clients. Then, if the client partner is willing to invest and also change their process to use the AI instead of manual work, then we work on the ROI and impact to understand how many years will we take to return the finances spent on AI. Like, if you're making a process efficient, it will save you cost, or it will save you lives, or it will save some KPI. So ROI is calculated, and then the business feasibility is established, and we get an NDA, and then the data feasibility is evaluated, where what should be the data that we need to ask for. So if you're talking to a scientist, different data is required. If you're talking to a financial operations person in a pharma, different type of data should be asked for. So what we follow is that the data should be something that my stakeholder cares the most about. So I ask a finance person, what do you care the most about? And they say, oh, I care about the cash inflow and outflow. And I'll ask, do you have any data about the cash outflow? And do you have data about the cash inflow? And he says, what data do you require? And I say, what do you care about in cash outflow? And they would say, my cash outflow is mostly salaries, or my cash outflow is mostly the raw material that I use for drug manufacturing. And then I talk about, give me the raw material purchase data, or purchase orders, or bill clearance and all that. So what do we care about is like a complete cycle of asking questions. And then when we get the data, we try to evaluate whether the data will be available to the model and to us for data science. Is the actual connection available, or the data is in silos and you have to wait for months and months to get the data that is required for AI? Once we solve that, then we say, is the data accurate, or the data is evolving and it gets accurate after 1 or 2 months. So once we establish that, the data feasibility is established, and we go into the phase of execution feasibility, that yes, we have the 2 of the above boxes checked, but can we feasibly execute it? Is the technology accessible? Do you have good cloud access? Or do you want to do it on-prem and have good hardware for AI training? And the model that you're asking me to make, let's say, is it going to be trainable in the timely manner, and will you be able to train it? Because some models in AI require millions of dollars just to train. So it tells that it asks us whether we are doing a just ask financially in the form of the hardware and the other software activities. And then model IO flow is reasonable, which means that who will give the input and where will the output be used? Is the output going to come in time so that the decision can use the output, or is the output and the decision going to play asynchronic roles? So whether model IO flow is going to make sense for the business or not. Once that is done, then we are good to go to sign on an ML project. This is the process that we follow. It is called CRISP DM, in which business understanding is done, data is understood, data transformations are applied, model is trained and evaluated. If the evaluation is not up to the mark and is not according to the expectation of our client, we go back to them and we ask them, please give us either more data or manage your expectations and give us some other KPI that we can predict for you. If they do that, they give us more data for another KPI or more data for the same KPI. We do the understanding again with them, and then we do the transformation in our team through programming, and then do the modeling. We train a good model for that and do the evaluation. This time, if the accuracy is high enough, we take it to deployment and we allow the app developers to consume our AI in their applications so that they can automate the process. This is again another life cycle of our ad hoc data science discovery. We sit with our client, we define the task, we help them collect the data, we do the EDA, which means exploratory data analysis, and try to find the feasibility of any modeling that is possible, because the client doesn't know whether the model is possible or not. They just want to, innovate, data-driven innovation. And then we decide on an algorithm, we develop it, we further refine it, and we do our best to come up with the best outcome of an algorithm. And then we take it through rigorous testing and evaluation. We make a technical report on what we found out about that activity. We show it, we discuss our finding with the stakeholders at the business. And if they like the outcome and they see the immediate ROI of deploying that model, we take the business sign off and we take it to production. This one is a more detailed and longer term activity where the client doesn't know what AI they need. They just have that and they want us to discover for them what data they require and what use case they can do. So in that case, we do a prototyping activity for many weeks. And then when we find out a use case in prototyping, then we take it to production. And then that is the production project that starts. We also are working on more traditional AI for healthcare. Why I'm calling it traditional, because almost every city has a university lab or a healthcare research lab in the Western world that are doing image analysis for healthcare. And of course, this is a very successful area and we are doing it, but I did not mention it clearly. I did not mention it in a lot detail in this presentation because I didn't want to show things that are already being discussed on so many forums. So yes, we also have expertise in image analysis of healthcare measurements like MRI and X-rays and detecting tumors from PET, CT scan. And we also do some more molecular and genetic style of analyses like flow cytometry and other bioinformatics services that are more knowledge worker consultancy than a production solution, because we don't need production solutions in those spaces. So that will be all around my discussion. I'll quickly go to the slide where I was showing my email address, so that if somebody is not able to get an answer that is detailed, then they can send me an email and you can start writing your email immediately. I thank you.
Tariq sir, for this very, very interesting presentation. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we can now have questions and comments and people can raise their hands. But I would like to acknowledge here the presence of Dr. Flemming Madsen. He is head of the pharma department at the Copenhagen University, which is the largest public sector university of Denmark. So I would request him if he could please say a few words on the presentation, and also if he has any comments. Over to you, Dr. Madsen.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Yeah, thank you for a very nice presentation. It's obviously a very important topic, and I do think, as it has been said here, and also kind of signaled that we are dealing with technology that are changing our ways and perceptions of doing things. I think one of the important things on integrating AI in all these matters, and especially pharma matters, and especially from a regulatory point of view, is that we also always have to remember that what is important for regulatory affairs is validated data, and validation is an important part. And when we use technologies or AI or whatever, we also need to validate the technology and methodologies, and that's an important topic. And Tariq, you might say that sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's very, very difficult, because who is validating what, and what? I mean, is the AI engineer who necessarily doesn't know a lot of things on validation in pharmaceutics, and you have to apply different systems, and it's all about quality management systems. So there's a lot. Sometimes it sounds easy, but in reality it's not always easy. So I don't know whether you can comment on that, perhaps.
Sure. Thank you, Madsen, for a great question. And this is a very important question, and that we have learned through very hard experiences.
Yeah.
And we have been able to deal with this situation in multiple, I would say, methods. So we have team members that are specifically imposing GXP compliance. So for rest of the audience, the GXP, if somebody doesn't know, GXP compliance means, for our projects, GXP compliance means good IT practices, good coding practices, good security practices, good deployment practices. Everything needs to be documented and needs to be verified, evaluated, and there has to be transparency of how it was evaluated. And we learned a lot in that process. We are thankful to our clients and also to our consultants that helped us in understanding, because we had to hire consultants to help us with that GXP compliance to provide to our clients. Then another method of this was that we use the best recommended cloud partners for health and pharma, and most of the software that they help us use are already GXP compliant and are already compliant with the pharma requirement.
Yeah.
And then our client also are mature in this practice, and they do not allow their data to be seen by nobody other than their own partners like us. And we are not able to bring any data point to our own laptops. We have to log into the secure cloud that is pharma compliant, that is healthcare compliant. We just see the screens of those computers, and we are able to type into these remote virtual machines. And that is why we were able to make these applications. Another method of this was that even if you make a good AI-based scoring technique, as you mentioned, either FDA will think or some compliance agency will think that the AI is not explainable, so you have to come up with the explainability of the AI, why AI is deciding certain things, and we had to do that. Other than that, FDA asks you for validity studies and reliability studies. Yes, you have made a scoring technique, but how valid and reliable it is? Do you have statistical ground for using this and discarding the previous one? So we are also helping our clients, because our clients are into the process of innovating the clinical process. Not only doing the clinical trials, but they also want to make news on how they improve the clinical trials, right? Yeah. So they are of course the experts of reliability study. Our clients are experts of reliability study and validity study, and they have taught us how to come up with AI methods of reliability studies so that we can improve our AI outcomes that I just shown on my slide. So validity and reliability is already in process, and we are very happy to be a part of that.
Thank you. And my last comment for that is that it's great because it's a learning process for everyone. So even the regulatory authorities, wherever they're located, and companies and academia are working together and have to work together, you know, to make the ultimate convergence of everything, because and it is a learning process, and I guess we only seen some of it yet, but there's a lot more to come. But thank you again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Watson. So we have a question from Mr. Zulfikar Kamal.
Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot for a really great presentation, Mr. Tariq. It's been fantastic to hear this journey within this pharma industry, the regulatory compliance and the testing part of it. Now, with the normal industry, it does take a lot of time coming into the market, doing a lot of these tests, and then having these approvals to get into the market. Does this new technology and AI, does this speed up you know, the compliance approvals and the entry into the markets, and whether you do something in one part of the world, can that you know, be approved in other parts of the world, so you can get speedy implementation on market level on the products that you are defining? So how does this change the game? Because the normal pharma companies, we know that it takes a long time to do the testing, get the approvals, get into the market. So the whole supply chain and is quite heavy, and is quite heavy on the regulatory compliance part. So do we see any change in that with this, please? Thanks.
Yes, thanks, Zulfikar, for a great question. And again, as we all agree, the compliance is there for a good reason, and it is very tedious to you know, play along with the compliance at the same time. Although it's so good, we all need it. When I take any medicine, I thank the compliance, but you know, it is tedious, and only one or two AI use cases will, of course, not speed up the process to a significant measure that we can see, you know, immediate changes, right, after a year or so. But what we are doing is we are playing our role in bits and pieces to speed up one or two steps of that compliance. So like pharmacovigilance, many people have to work and extract the adverse events, and now AI can just, you know, bring you all the adverse event, and you just can click submit, make your report the way your pharmaceutical company or FDA wants it. In the similar fashion, you don't need to note how many steps the patient is taking, you know, recording how many steps they are taking, and then after that you tell them to take your blood pressure or anything. You just ask them to wear the sensors, and then you just let them do their activity, the physical activity, and then the database will ingest the data, and the AI will take the measures, and they will go into your reports like CDC report or any other report that is required from the outcome. So in bits and pieces, if you focus on one process of drug trial that was time consuming, yes, we have seen phenomenal increase in the time, and also the automation, and you know, the manual things, and the trustability of the outcomes. You know, even today, the compliance requirements are not foolproof. If a third-party clinic is telling you, yes, I did my compliance and I did wait for 1 minute before taking the measurement, maybe you have to just accept it, and FDA has to just accept it. They have no way of telling how many seconds did she wait before taking the heart rate.
Like in the
so,
West,
you know,
we have, yeah, in the West, we have these data privacy and ethical concerns also when gathering data from the data subjects in order to process that with new technology. Of course, we also need to touch on that when you are, you know, applying for FDA approval. So those concerns, yeah.
Yeah, that's a very right concern again. So most of our technology is driven by neural nets, and some of us might have heard that neural nets can use one business's data to solve problems in another business. So in pharmacovigilance, we are not using any patient data, any patient data from our own client, and we're just using third-party publicly available data of medical English text, right? Similarly, in sensors, there are data sets available for detecting walk and standing and running of patients. And those patients are not identified. Data set is collected by normal people because standing is standing, right? So you can train your model and then you can detect it in patient data. So only the models get to see the data, just like a processor or a RAM chip can see the data. Similar is the model that can see the data, and nobody is, of course, accessing, or we would not be actually let in the cloud of a pharma company, of course.
So you can say that in a sense, you have a lot of data that you can provide in order to develop a use case, which might be lacking in the West. That in the Nordics, we don't have that much data based on the test that we would like to do, and we don't have access to that much data material when we are using these technologies. And there you have a clear advantage because you have technological upside with the AI, and you have embedded that in the traditional supply chain of testing, and you also have integration to a lot of data which can be used by the Nordic companies, then of course tailor-made to their own processes, their own systems, but at least they will get a lot of comparable data, and they will get a lot of comparable to the standards. Of course, there might be some work that they have to do, but I think that you're coming in with a value add for the companies in order to give a different solution on how you can optimize your supply chain.
That's very well put, Zulfikar. And in pharma companies, if you go as an AI consultant and you tell them how much data do you have and bring me all the data, you're not gonna be talking to them for long, because everybody gets alarmed when you talk more about data. And even if you're doing an activity and you ask for their data, sometimes a week is just passed because somebody else's approval is pending, and they're waiting for multiple approvals for providing data. So we rarely count for our clients' data or patients' data for training our AI. We use publicly available data, and we prefer to use the models that are using transfer learning. There is this term transfer learning, which means that learn from one domain and then use the same intelligence for solving problems in another domain.
So I think a good way to experience, or maybe to play a little bit around with your solution, could be if it could be in a sandbox, and then it could be open up for the industry in Denmark to go in and maybe do some sort of a garage on top of that, and utilize that infrastructure to make some solutions within their own companies. So perhaps some sort of a sandbox where we have access to a generic infrastructure with your data and protocols. And then the companies can go in and play around with it for their own tailor making of their own supply chain. And then, of course, there could be some consultancy on it. I'm just thinking solutions for how you could provide some value for the ecosystem in Denmark.
That's a very good solution. We are already in process of making an intelligent data platform for health sector, and the use cases that I just mentioned, some of those will be provided in that. And it is, of course, initially for the demo purpose, but this we are already having on our radar. We are also trying to filter out the use cases that are going to bring the most acceptance, because some of the use cases, if you show in your generic platform, because your potential customer doesn't know that you're using your transfer learning, and they would just be worried that, hey, they might ask us patient data and they will not contact us. So you have to be very careful in pitching any application to general public in the health sector, unless they know how you're doing it, how you're not asking for patient data and still providing AI. is a challenge, and we're trying to strategize that in the marketing.
Okay, we have two more questions. One is, I would ask actually Mr. Rehan Mir. So he's a young Danish Pakistani. He's running his own digital marketing company. So please go ahead, Rehan.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes, Rehan.
So thank you, Mr. Tariq, for the opportunity of presenting such an instructive presentation. I just have one question in regards to your technology. Would you call it an innovation that is incremental or more as a radical innovation within the pharma industry? And will this technology at some point replace the need of human beings?
Yes, so there are multiple parts to your questions, like replacing the need of human being. It will be possible, but I'm not sure if it will be possible in our lifetime. And the other thing about whether it's a radical innovation or an incremental innovation. So we are innovating specific processes in the pipeline of our clients' drug testing and our clients' pharmacovigilance and their regulatory compliance. So I would not say that it's radical innovation. It is innovating small bits and pieces, keeping the regulatory aspects of these implementations in view, and what's usable, what's just a fantasy idea. You know, that clear distinction between those two things is important. So it's an incremental innovation that is more driven by the value add than by the novelty of the idea. Value add to patients, value add of quick drug approvals so that the patient that are missing a drug in the market can get to the drug indication, and helping the pharma sector minimize cost that they spend for 10 years on a drug, so that if the cost of drug discovery and drug innovation is less, maybe we can get access to more drugs cheaper, and also we can hire more scientists to make more drugs. You know, cost is a big barrier in how many molecules you can work on. So cost reduction is a huge driver for our team and also our clients that we engage with in health sector.
Thank you for the answer. It's very interesting to hear how AI is transforming technology, not only in IT, but also in the medical sector. Here in Denmark, I run my media agency where we use AI to within digital marketing by using on Facebook, Instagram, and Google Ads. And we are seeing a radical change of how to perform marketing within AI. It's optimizing your campaign budget, increasing revenues, and helping customers reach their perfect audiences through AI. So thank you for the opportunity of displaying how it can be used within the pharmacy sector.
Thanks, Rehan. This is an interesting use case that you discussed. Mr. Ambassador Ahmed, you're on mute.
Thanks. Sorry about that. So since we are live streaming on Facebook, so there is a question that we have received there, which is AI is the key to coming developments in the IT field. How is Pakistan progressing in this field? So this is a sort of a broader question, but you may like to comment on it.
Sure. So I would say AI is progressing on a very accelerated speed, and you know, the best talent that is fueling AI is younger graduates. And when we were undergraduates, we were not able to grasp the concepts like you know, eigenvalues or regression, or you know, it was like a very 20 years ago or 15 years ago, it was something that you learn in the advanced graduate school. And today, undergraduate students are learning all these technologies, and they're claiming different model accuracies on their belt. And then there are dozens of startups and big companies in Pakistan that give opportunities to these students while they are doing their degrees. So the grass is greener, I would say, and uh, I really enjoy working with those young people. When I was in college, I could not imagine somebody having 2 years of experience can work on a $25 billion worth of a client annually. And they are doing that kind of a progress, and it's amazing how they progress with the projects, having a Pakistani education, and then the client has never an objection on any, I would say, competency of those fresh resources just in 2 years. That's amazing, and it's not one instance that I saw. There's so many young, talent that inspire you and you want to, be in this era, fresh out of college, and learn so much with the young energy and youth. Myself, I sometimes want to be them. That's how I feel when I see this new talent of AI that is coming in the market, and there is abundance. You can, like, I was able to hire 30 people in this 1 year in data science. That is the extent of availability of data science talent. Mr. Ambassador, you're on mute. You might want to unmute. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tariq. We had a great session with you, and I'm sure all the participants have learned a lot in terms of the knowledge that you had to offer, and also to understand the kind of innovative developments which are happening in Pakistan. I would also like to thank Dr. Fleming Medson for sharing his valuable time with us and staying on with us for this entire session. With that, I would like to, this session has been recorded and it will be available on the YouTube channel of the embassy as well as on our Facebook page. I've posted the email address of Mr. Tariq. So anyone who has any further information to seek from him, they can approach him directly. So once again, thank all of you and wish you a very good evening.